Hey everybody, welcome back to Casual Conversations. I'm John Malanca, your host, and I'm with three colleagues, friends, and doctors, Dr. Jordan Tishler, Dr. Adam Abodeely, and a dear friend, Dr. Suraj Tandon from Canada. And since the last time you saw me, I was doing this in tribute to our guest, Suraj. So this is taking me 6 months. He gets that, he says, in a weekend. So I'm jealous. Anyway, good to have you on, Suraj. And we may have Dr. Jahan Marcu joining us throughout this casual conversation. And so Suraj sits on the board here at the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists with the rest of us here. And he's a wonderful man, but doctor, knows his stuff, and so we're very happy to have you on, Suraj.
Thanks so much, guys.
So we covered quite a few different topics, and one topic that comes up not only from your guys' side with your colleagues as the doctors, but also the patients. Doctors say, "What do I say when patients ask me, about cannabis?" And patients say, "How do I talk to my doctor about cannabis?" And so that's the topic we were going to cover today: how to speak to your doctor about medical cannabis. One thing that I always share: it's not illegal to ask questions. Doesn't matter what state you live in. I don't want to say in all countries. Some countries don't allow the conversation or topic of cannabis to come up, but generally here for for America and our Canadian counterpart here, asking questions about medical cannabis is still legal, even if you do live in a legal state or province as well. So, Dr. Tishler, take it away. You want to start off with what are the things that you share with your patients? And since you are, we're all in this cannabis sector, the topic comes up, and this is the thing I share with with patients: is don't be afraid. This is your health, your life, and feel free to ask. And so nowadays, 2022. It's not as big of a stigma. You're trying to get in there. It's not that big of a stigma as it was in 2010, when we jumped in this industry. So have at it, Dr. Tishler.
You actually brought up a very interesting point that I think I might sort of detour on for just a second, which is, from the physician's point of view, what do I tell my patients? And I actually think that's a pretty easy question, which is to say, not if the question is, how do I explain all of the medical and stuff and the data to patients? I think that's not an easy question, but I'm sort of taking this from the perspective of your primary care physician or some other sort of frontline specialty like neurology. And I think that the answer to, okay, my patient has asked me about cannabis, and maybe I don't feel comfortable with this because I don't feel like I know the answers to this. I think that the best approach is sort of the honest one, which is to say, listen, this is a new and emerging field. There's a lot to know, and I am not the expert on this. But I do have colleagues such as Dr. Tishler or any of the other folks who are on this call who can help you with this. And so as your doctor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer you to one of these cannabinoid specialists. And then we will see what she or he has to say, and we will work together that way. And I think that, if the question were about cardiology or endocrinology or any other field of medicine, that's exactly what you would do, right? So I think the answer is from a physician's point of view, this isn't any different. Now, it may be that a far more cardiologist and endocrinologist than cannabinoid specialists, and that's something we're working on here at the association. But we do have on the association's webpage a directory of members who are prescribing clinicians. So you may be able to find somebody to whom you can refer that way in your neck of the woods. But also, if you can't, we're certainly available to help sort of nationally and internationally in terms of information as well as guidance. So that's kind of my thought if you're the doc on one hand, and then on the other hand, if you're a patient, I guess it's sort of the same answer. It's like, let's be honest, right? Go to your doctor, expect that your doctor is going to be of good faith and who wants to hear from you and try to address your concerns. I think a lot of patients sort of assume out of the gate that their doctor is going to ridicule or dismiss them. And I'm sure that that does happen, but I hope it doesn't happen very often. And I don't see it much. And just ask the questions. And be forthright. And when I started in this field about 10 years ago, patients were telling me things like, oh, don't talk to my doctors. I don't want them to know. Or don't send your medical note back to my primary care doctor. And I always kind of gently tried to guide them in the direction of allowing me that communication, because I think it's a very important part of any kind of a clinical experience that everybody kind of is on the same page and we're talking to each other and feeding back to each other. Otherwise, you're not getting the best clinical care. I can understand 10 years ago, as you said, the stigma was different from it is now. And thankfully, I think most patients at this point are much more comfortable with that kind of loop closure. But I think that's really important.
You mentioned about patients being comfortable as well as doctors being comfortable. Back in the day, like I said, 2010, 11, 12, we would speak at retirement communities and I would ask, how many people speak? And a lot of hands came up because that they were embarrassed to have this conversation. And even so, the doctor was embarrassed to have this conversation. And so, don't be afraid to ask your doctor. If he or she is not well-versed in cannabis, ask them if they have any other colleagues, because nowadays I'm certain someone knows someone who is a cannabis expert and doing that. I mean, having a relationship with your doctor and patient relationship is pretty darn important. Dr. Tandon, good to have you here as well.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
So with that, how does a patient, when you come in, would you rather have a patient ask questions of, I'm curious about this. What do you know? What are your thoughts? Let's take cannabis aside and maybe other topics that patients have come in to talk about. Do you have patients that come in and say, do you know anything about this? What are your thoughts, to break the ice that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so just piggybacking on Dr. Tishler's comments, I think the first thing, it's important for us to get a basic understanding of the knowledge base about the patient as to how much do they know about cannabis, where did their interest stem from. That's the sort of approach that I take. I ask patients, so tell me about what your understanding of cannabis is, if they've been referred to me for, its use in a particular indication. And that gives me sort of a basic understanding as to how to approach the conversation further with them, how much information to give, or if this is going to be sort of an open discussion and a long-term discussion about cannabis in general or its use as a medicine. I think a couple of points before I get into the sort of the nitty-gritty about it, but I think being here in Canada, I think we've been very privileged to sort of have things fast-tracked a bit, where in the sense that when I returned back to Canada from the US, there was still this stigma that was associated with cannabis use amongst practitioners and amongst patients. Fortunately, I've seen the stigma sort of lessen over time. But the first thing is to sort of, again, reiterate to all healthcare providers, including patients, is to first have an open discussion about it. Let's talk about the science behind cannabis, and then we can sort of determine whether this might be beneficial for you or not. Typically, I've encountered, just like Dr. Tishler, and is that some patients have been very apprehensive to have discussions about cannabis, or again, they don't want the referring doctor, their family doctor, or their nurse practitioner to be made aware that they're coming to see you. At other times, patients are referred to us for a specific assessment. But I take several approaches that if they come to see me directly, or they want to be under the care of their provider, but they don't know how to sort of broach that topic, is just to say, let them know that you've heard about cannabis either through the news or the media, you've read either literature or a book about it and its potential for, whatever illness, or that they've heard about a friend who might have benefited from it. I would say sort of just broach that topic with your provider first and see what their understanding and their level how comfortable they feel about having that topic. Typically, as doctors, we should always welcome questions from patients, no matter how difficult they may be. If we're not knowledgeable about the topic, and I've encountered many doctors who either one, have no clue about medical cannabis and its potential, or two, they don't feel comfortable on how to prescribe it or authorize it, then they really should do their due diligence as a healthcare provider in either recommending or referring that patient to someone else who might be more of an expert. And as Jordan mentioned, there are a number of organizations where you can have access to that information as who might be an expert working in this capacity. Typically, we should always remove. It's always easy, sometimes I think for us to forget that we may have our own biases about particular topics, whether it's cannabis, birth control, abortion, or et cetera, various topics. But at the end of the day, we should always remember that patients are coming to us to seek expert opinion and medical advice. We need to do our due diligence in ensuring that they feel comfortable, safe, that they can have an open discourse with us. And if we don't feel comfortable or have the know-how how to recommend or provide information, then we make sure that we can send them to someone who might be able to provide that information. So that's the sort of approach that I take. And I think, again, at the end of the day, our duties as providers is to make sure we try and treat our patients, reduce symptomology, and improve their quality of life. And whether cannabis might be suited for them, that's a discussion that needs to be had.
Thank you for that. And so, Adam, a lot of doctors think that I talk to, and patients think it's just a fad. It's coming in here and it's a hot new topic. And I'm tired. I don't want my patients to ask me that one. And there's no studies or history. And that's the thing that's just it's disappointing, because it used to be legal here in the United States until 1937. It was in the pharmacopoeia. Unfortunately, it's no longer, I guess, being taught in any medical. I would say about 9 or 10% of medical schools are educating their doctors. And so, you being a doctor, did you learn about this? Was it even a discussion in medical school?
It definitely was not a discussion during medical school. Now, I graduated medical school. It's not that long ago. I graduated 2004 from medical school. So 2004 was years I matriculated there, and we didn't receive any education about the endocannabinoid system. And to your point, most schools still are not offering any education around this. The one thing that I think, that I would like to add to the discussion is first is that I agree with all the comments that have been made. We are in a unique situation where we can actually listen to patients, and that's part of our responsibility. One thing that we're probably confronted with patients who want to use cannabis or are interested in talking about cannabis for lots of different angles, if you will. Some people are referred. Some people will bring it up nonchalantly if they're in the office talking about something else, and you can tell they're trying to skirt around the issue. I think I may have a little bit different a perspective than Dr. Tishler, Dr. Tandon, in the sense that, as I'm a surgeon by trade, and one thing that I think is important for us to recognize is that, cannabis crosses multiple specialties. You're dealing with oncology, you're dealing with pain management, you're dealing with neurology, you're dealing with pediatrics, you're dealing with general medicine. People, the indications for cannabis are just so broad reaching that it is important that we continue to have somewhat of a collaborative effort, especially somebody like myself as a surgeon. I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And so the first thing that I always tend to do is to ask, I tend to ask patients if they bring it up. I say, well, have you discussed this with your primary care doctor? And we'll get various responses from that. And some people said, yeah, I did. And they, weren't really sure what to say, or they said, just go see Abodeely. He'll figure it out and take care of that. But one thing that I've tried to continuously do is that, one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to step on the toes of, other doctors and other specialties who have prescribed certain medications. a lot of people come in and say, hey, I've been on Ambien and I've been on Klonopin or Xanax to help me sleep at night, and I'm interested in using cannabis. And I say, well, have you spoken to your doc about it? And your primary doc about it? And they say, yeah, sure. But they just said to go talk to you about it. Well, I like to get in touch with the primary care docs, or the example, let's say if a neurologist sends me a patient because they want to start a patient who's interested in cannabis. Well, as a surgeon, I'm not going to be responsible for managing somebody's Tegretol levels or any of their anti-seizure medications. And I take the same approach with the primary care docs. If someone's coming to me for cannabis, I will either call them or I will send them a letter and say, hey, we're going to start, your patient on cannabis, so you might want to adjust their other medications accordingly. I think or at least, we need to kind of collaborate to monitor this patient together to make sure that, we're not over medicating somebody. And I find that one is that it creates, a mutual respect amongst providers. It recognizes, cannabis as a medicine. And then thirdly, it also provides us the opportunity to educate. And, by reaching out, because I get that, well, just go talk to Abodeely about that. Well, I then have to reach back out and say, there's more to this than them just coming in to seeing me and saying, here's your cannabis. We have to figure out how that's going to integrate with, potential side effects of other medications and such. And again, knowing what you know and what you don't know is one of the most important things of being a good provider. So, I'm not an expert on, seizure medications, and I'm not an expert on even sleeping medications for that matter. So, but I do tend to consider myself to be an expert on cannabis and some of the potential pitfalls we have to look out for. But medicine is a collaborative effort, and keeping our colleagues in the loop with this is very, I've found to be very beneficial, from an acceptance standpoint and also just an education standpoint. And to Suraj's point, and finding out initially, one of the first questions I always ask is, are you naive to cannabis or not? Because people who are, I would say it's about 75% of my patients come and they've at least used cannabis before. Whether they're, steadily using it's a different story. We're only about 25% of my patients are completely naive to cannabis. And maybe that's, I don't know how that fits in with other providers on this line. But when somebody says they use cannabis every day, that's a very different discussion than somebody who has never, they've never even touched it or, tried it or anything like that. And, whether or not that's a, good or bad thing is debatable. Some patients will come and, they've kind of got it dialed in. They've figured out what's worked for them over the years, and they're just trying to do it legally and to do it under the guidance of a provider. Where some people come with these crazy ideas and stuff they've been doing for years, and we have to gently find a way to educate them as well, and to change some of their thoughts and ideas about how cannabis, can and should be used as a medicine.
Thank you. It's funny that you say that, because coming with a million ideas, everyone turns to Google at university. Something happens, hangnail, go to Google it. Same thing with cannabis. Cannabis is not a one size fits all. And so I think it's really important for doctors and medical professionals and patients to know that it's not just, yep, here's your recommendation, call me in a year if you need a renewal. Here's your recommendation, go down to the dispensary and you're on your own. And I think that the place of a doctor, he or she should educate themselves. And nowadays there's so many opportunities to get educated and I guess even get CMEs, continuing medical educations, from programs that we do here. But one question that most patients do ask is, will cannabis help with my medical condition? I don't want to get high. These are other questions. What should I avoid? Are there drug-to-drug interactions? How much do I take? Because dosing is not a one size fits all. Protocol is not. Guidance, I think it's mix and match. One thing, do you guys look at age, weight, current health condition, sensitivities, other modalities that the patient may be taking? And coming up, we're not 20 anymore. Back in the days when we were, it's like, oh, won't do that again. Okay, make note, mental note, won't do, but when you're battling with something as we get older, God forbid it's not life threatening, it's these are questions. And again, this is your body. And so you want to take it from there, Jordan, when patients come in to see you, and what you can share with other doctors who are watching this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, everything you've said is absolutely spot on. I'm not entirely sure what medicine is a one size fits all, but certainly cannabis is not a one size fits all. And just the same way that, some people might need one puff on their albuterol inhaler once a week, and other people might need 2 puffs every 6 hours. So I think that there's no question that the goal here has to be focusing on providing adequate patient care, and that involves education, ongoing guidance, repeat visits, attention to detail, communication with other providers, like Dr. Abodeely mentioned. I think that's absolutely crucial. It's interesting that he was mentioning that 75% of his patients were not cannabis naive. I suppose, I have a bunch of patients who come to me and they're elderly and they say, well, yeah, I smoked some weed back in the 70s, but I haven't been doing it. So maybe they're not cannabis naive in that sense. And actually, I kind of like that scenario because they have some idea of what it feels like to get some intoxication, but they're not, misusing or anything at this point. So we don't have to sort of address that boat. Many of those people come in and they say, well, yeah, I used it back then, but it made me paranoid, and so I stopped using it. And it's interesting to have that conversation with patients because they're very concerned about feeling out of control. And I think that particularly as we age, we tend to like our control a little bit more. When we're younger, the idea of, going off on the roller coaster is more appealing. So, I actually have a conversation with folks in which I say, look, whatever you did back in the day, whatever you did kind of, for a laugh, that was very uncontrolled. What we're talking about is how little medicine can we use in order to cover what's bothering you. And I think that that's very reassuring to folks because as we know, the less medicine we need, the less side effect we're going to get. And intoxication, in my view, is one of those side effects. We can, and as you know, that the concern about using cannabis then also translates into the potential for negative outcomes. So again, that kind of hand-holding and fear allaying really sets patients up for better outcomes. I think,
that's a great point about outcome. And that's a question. Do you ask your patients, all of you, what outcome are you looking? When we went through this with Corinne, our outcome was to save a life. So that to me is the goal, as to save a life, where others are like, I want to sleep better. I want to get off my meds. I would love my loved one to pass peacefully and not be on meds. And so everyone has, so is that a question that you ask your patients? What is your I guess your end goal? Or
we call them goals of care.
Yeah.
And I don't usually ask it explicitly, like, what are your goals of care? But clearly through the process of speaking with and interviewing the patient, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Now, a lot of patients come in and their goals of care are stated. I'm coming because I'm having insomnia or pain or whatever. But, the discussion becomes sort of, what are you looking for? What are your expectations? What have you tried before? How has it worked for you? What fears do you have based on your prior experience or your lack thereof? I mean, all of those things kind of go into the preamble that sets us up to be able to provide the education that gets at both how to accomplish those goals and also how to avoid some of the trepidation that could stand in the way of achieving those goals.
Thank you. Suraj or Adam, what do you have when you pay? I mean, you in your practices, I think they're going into surgery. So, well, both you guys, going with in your practice, if your patient doesn't see eye to eye with you and say it's a patient going into a doctor's office and their doctor is anti-cannabis and I don't want to hear it, which actually happened to my aunt. Her doctor said, Lois, I'm gonna act like you didn't ask me that question. And she says, you gotta be kidding me. You've been my doctor for 30 years. And I said, what'd you do? She goes, I switched doctors. And so can you talk about you being doctors? And I know you don't want to lose patients like either way of passing, but also losing patients of saying, hey, I'm not jiving you with you anymore. But can you share for the rights of the patient that it is okay, and you being medical doctors, do you take that in an offense that we lost another patient? They went over to see Dr. Tishler.
No, I would say we never take offense to it. I'm sure some providers might be disappointed or sad to lose a patient, especially if they developed a long-standing rapport, with these patients over 10, 20, 30 years. Just as an example, I've encountered this situation on a couple of occasions where I've had patients who sort of sought an independent sort of referral, to my practice, and sort of wanted to keep our sort of assessment private to their family doctor, because they were aware that their family doctor was sort of anti cannabis, had their own opinions and didn't believe in it. And they've been with them for 30 years, and their spouse was with them and their children, and they didn't want to broach that topic with them because they were satisfied with the rest of the care. So obviously our job is to try and be diligent to our patients, but also to our colleagues as well. You never want to overstep toes, but I think at the end of the day, again, our best interests are really for our patients, and we need to sort of come up with a solution to best suit their needs. Often at times I will suggest to them, just as we're having a casual conversation today, I'll say, let's start off, maybe you guys should have that maybe you and your doctor or your family doctor should broach this by having a casual conversation about cannabis. Like, just put that out there, say, hey, I've been looking at the news, what are your thoughts about the risk versus benefits of cannabis? That's the first piece, I think, to get all providers start to think about and accept and maybe have open discussion about it, is just put the topic out there. Maybe they've never had someone ask them because they've always had this wall up, and maybe they have this persona that they're anti-cannabis, but people's opinions change over time. And as we see further, high quality studies and evidence suggesting that there is, likely good benefit of incorporating medical cannabis in addition to other treatments or as an adjunct, they might have changed their opinion over time. So that's the first thing, is we may have expectations, but of patients and providers, but let's open this conversation. We see other substances coming to the spotlight now in terms of mushrooms and other substances as being potential therapeutic agents. I think providers are sort of coming around, as the rest of you had pointed out. It's becoming less, it's becoming more destigmatized, but certainly try to have that conversation with your own provider, and then see if maybe you could even reach out to that provider and say, hey, listen, whether you're offering any CMEs or a talk about medical cannabis, people's opinions change over time. So now, if you have a patient who's pretty adamant that their provider is completely against it, well, then you need to do your job by perhaps giving the patient with a list of potential specialists who can provide an appropriate assessment, whether it's yourself or someone else that's maybe a bit closer to their home. Give them that opportunity to say, hey, listen, there are other providers. Can you go seek, do a self-referral to another provider? Absolutely. Some providers don't take self-referrals, but here in Canada, we certainly do both. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that all providers are aware of the treatment for this patient. We want to make sure this is a interdisciplinary team approach. It's not a single, I treat this patient, let's keep it hush, and then you go back to your doctor and get treatment for other stuff. The most important thing is to have a comprehensive team care approach. And I think most doctors are coming on board. They understand this, including whether it's family doctors or internists or even surgeons, is that just looking at the importance of having surgeons be aware of patients using cannabis is important post-operatively, pre-operatively, and maintaining that they have ongoing care after their surgery is done, whether they need to be back on their their cannabinoids. I think I'm glad to see that there is a multidisciplinary team approach, that all providers from various specialties are recognizing this and working together. I think that's what's important.
I would jump in and say, I think that the issue of don't believe in it is an odd one. I mean, we're not talking about Santa Claus here, right? So, as a physician, either you're going to take an evidence-based approach, right? In which point, you can say, I'm not convinced by the data. But the idea of I don't believe in this is kind of more religious or dogmatic. At some point, we have to decide just exactly what sort of or how much data do we need in order to be convinced. And to some degree, each practitioner is going to have a different threshold. But when you start looking at reports from the National Academy of Sciences here in the US from as long ago as 2017 saying that certain issues like pain management have been definitively covered, one really has to wonder what's at stake for any doctor who's staying, firmly on the I don't believe in it front. And that raises eyebrows for me, makes me fairly concerned. So I think that we need to encourage our colleagues to, part of it also may be that they don't know the data. And then so they're just taking that kind of a truculent point of view. And I don't think that that's fair to our patients. So we really need for our colleagues to either get some basic high level understanding of that data. And that's one of the things that we're doing through the ACS. Or at least say, look, I don't really know this data, but here's the expert who does. But I will then defer to that expert as opposed to sort of, again, taking that kind of negative point of view. Anyway.
And it doesn't have to be one or the other.
No.
One or the other. And a lot of patients say, you know what, I'm going to try this. And if this does not work, then I'll try this. And you can use in conjunction with each other. And I truly believe a medical professional needs to be involved. As I mentioned earlier, we're not all 20, and just, won't try that one again. And I think it's really important to do that for specifically.
I'm 20.
You're 20, yes, I know that.
If I could add something to that, because this definitely rings true with my personal experience with this. Is 2014 when New York State legalized it. For 2014, 2015, this was a real issue for me, trying to convince local providers that cannabis was a viable option. And it became so bad that what I had to start doing was I actually had to start because I was getting, and these are not threats, but as a surgeon, we rely on referrals from primary care docs, whether they send us someone who has a gallbladder problem, colonoscopy, hernia, whatever the case may be. And so early on, I had a couple providers that basically said, you start doing cannabis, I'm not sending you patients. And this is true. And so I had to make it a policy within my own practice that I did not accept a patient for a consultation for cannabis unless they got approval first from their primary care doc. Mm-hmm. And, I had to do that to basically to kind of protect my, reputation in my surgical practice, and very, very unfortunate that I had to do that. But, now for those of us who are on this call and have had experience doing this for years, we probably have all experienced, definitely an increased acceptance. And unfortunately, I don't have to deal with that anymore. But it did take a couple of years to get over, to get over that hurdle. And that's how I approached it in the beginning. And I think it's important for those who might be on this, watching this presentation here, this casual conversation, especially if you're in an emerging market, if you have a new state that's opening up and, you're listening to this and you're, you might have some of the same challenges that I had early on. And that was trying to, how do you actually balance this? And, I took the approach that I'm not going to argue with my referring providers because that's not going to do me any good. But I did, and patients would say, well, what do? I want to use I would like you to certify me in New York State for cannabis, but my primary care doc says no way. I said, well, you got to find another primary care doc. And so some would do that and some wouldn't. But fortunately, it took probably 2 to 3 years where then we were able to stop, we didn't mandate that our patients needed a referral from their medical doc before we would see them. But it was a real problem the first 2 years. And I'm hoping that, the stage has been set for other providers in the country, that as other states open up for both for medicinal purposes, that that hopefully they won't experience a lot of the challenges that I had early on. But at the same time, I don't have any doubt that it's gonna continue to be a problem for states that are when they open up.
You made a good point of continuing opening up. The laws are happening where the cannabis laws are starting to drop or being accepted, not only in the recreational side, 21 and over, but also medical side. Before we leave, I know there's casual conversations. The topic really was, how do patients speak to their doctor about this? First off, don't be afraid. But I'm a big fan of journaling, taking notes. When you go into your doctor's office, you guys may have this or not, but bring a notepad or bring a family member that can also drop, because you have so many things coming at you. But ask the question, will cannabis help my current medical condition? How much do I take? I don't want to be high. These are all great questions. And then for your doctor, bringing it in there, how do you feel about this, doc? What are your thoughts? Do you know, if you don't know anybody, can you refer me to somebody? Building a nice relationship, but also, again, this is your health. Don't be afraid to switch doctors if you need to. Again, this is your health. And Jahan, how you doing? There's so much to talk about. I know this is the casual conversation, and maybe the next conversation we can touch up on is, a lot of doctors say, where do I go? Do I just write them a recommendation? Am I able to write this? Are they in the system? And then where do you send them? To get their products. I had you on the closed screen. Had you been on for a while, Jahan? And I just opened the.
Oh yeah, I've been enjoying this conversation.
Oh, sorry, man. I did not see you, and that's why I didn't include you. I had to square it.
It's all good.
So my apology there.
That's all good, and I've heard a lot of good things. And as a pharmacologist in the space who's done clinical research, I've been involved with patient advocacy and education for a number of years in preparing them to go talk to a health professional. So I want to apologize if any of them came off a little too strong to you guys, because I would arm them with research papers, and I would tell them, look up information, even if you don't understand it, but it seems like it might apply. You might have to educate your doctor and give them a homework assignment. And for some clinicians and healthcare professionals are aware of the issue, but I also thought it was helpful for the clinician to, one, either see that there was a wide breadth of research out there, or two, to see the information sources that the patient is going to. And if a clinician wants to remain that trusted source of information, they're going to have kind of a dynamic mind, the ability to take in information and apply it, to the situation. And I think that's an area. And there are a lot of third parties out there that will educate patients. And the trouble is that they're not all offering the same quality of information. And it's always good to encourage patients to seek out multiple sources. Usually, if 2 or 3 places are saying the same thing, there might be something there. That's a general rule. Obviously, there are exceptions, and everyone is, advertising the same products. But again, I think the thing is, the best advice I give to patients is one, to be honest with, their goals. Like we said, what are their outcomes they want? What are their goals with this product? Are they naive? Are they not naive? Do they have preconceived notions about what it could do? But to bring in as much information for the healthcare professional to read together, to discuss. And I would keep, I have what I call my best studies folder, and I just update it periodically. So every time a patient comes to me, I can send them, here are 5 studies. I think here's a review article. Here's some original research. Here's some basic research. Here's a case report. And I'm just encouraging patients to not be afraid, again, to say, look, I know there's something here. Here's a study about chronic pain in cannabis. Like, I think, this speaks to me. I think there's something here. And that gives, I think, a clinician an objective kind of way to look at the issue. But there are nonprofits that are pretty good at educating patients. I know Dr. Tishler received an award recently from one of them, right? Something like Medical Cannabis Doctor of the Year, I think, from Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, not too many of those awards floating around. That's from Americans for Safe Access, which is a patient advocacy group and generally does, I think, one of the cleaner jobs at communicating what patients need to know about cannabis and educating them to not only talk to their loved ones, but to talk to their clinicians. And I think if a patient can talk to a clinician about cannabis, it makes all the other conversations easier with loved ones, with children, and other things about what this product is and why they're using it. So whenever you're looking at sources for patients or for clinicians trying to guide patients, it's not uncommon for a third party to explain to patients how to use things, whether it's insulin or an inhaler. There are third parties that show patients how to use these things. There are patient groups. And so obviously finding patient discussion groups can sometimes be helpful on social media, where people share their stories and you can see if it aligns with your values and your expected outcomes. And I think also when you look at organizations for education, look for partnerships, see who else uses it. Are they endorsed by anyone? Are they accredited? Are they, working with the university? Who's writing this stuff? Who's on their advisory board? Who's on their team? And I think that's really important. And the same sort of expectations you might have from a clinical office of who's working there and their background, you should have the same expectations from someone who's giving you education, or you're getting that information from. So, it's a little bit of homework, but you have to dig a little bit beyond, the flashy logos. And, just because you have a undergraduate degree from YouTube or perhaps a PhD from Google, it's really not the same thing as finding a trusted source of information.
Let me jump in here and mention something else, which is for the clinicians who may be watching our casual conversation. If they're members of the association, they should know that Dr. Tandon is managing this thing we call the Clinical Reference Library, which contains pretty much 2 to 3 really salient articles on every topic, whether we're talking about the treatment of X, Y, or Z, or the risks associated with vaporizers, or those sorts of things. So in terms of being able to do your homework for patients, we've kind of boiled it down, and you can see the primary data. There are a bunch of other courses that you can take, but the Clinical Reference Library is a really good resource for getting your hands quickly on sort of the data that leads to a punchline. So thanks.
Well said. Casual conversation. I think we'll end it here. Dr. Marcu, Jahan, thank you. Thanks for adding that. Again, my apologies, as I had it on a smaller screen and I didn't see you pop on. So, but thanks for jumping on and always adding to these conversations. Dr. Abodeely, thank you as always. Dr. Tishler and Dr. Tandon, always great to see you all, and look forward to our next topic. This is John Malanca with the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day, everyone.